That's dope. But we need a fucking drummer. Because Patrick's playing drums and he's a singer. Patrick's like, yo, I got a soul voice. And they're like, wait, how do you have a soul voice? And he's like, yo, watch this. Yeah!
So, when you ask any Fall Out Boy the question what their debut album is, I'm pretty sure everybody would say 2003's Take This to Your Grave. Now, you would be right, but what if I told you you would also kind of be wrong? Because even though the band calls this their official debut album, there was one album that came out before this from them that was the intentional debut, but its intention was to get scrapped and never see the light of day. But the record label, well, they had other ideas. What am I talking about? I am talking about Fall Out Boy's LP. It's actually seen more as an EP nowadays. That was released in March of 2003, titled Evening Out with Your Girlfriend. This record only came out a couple months before Take This to Your Grave would, and from February to September of 2002, the band was only allowed to work on this thing for 2 days. The record label at the time, which was Uprising, gave them 2 days during that 7-month period to work on this thing in general, and I guess the band at the time thought, this is a little sloppy, we don't want to release this as our debut record, let's turn things down and do things the right way. And again, that's pretty much what they did. Is from then on out, they became big in the emo pop-punk scene. Now, what you get from this record is a lot of the same from early Fall Out Boy. It definitely is the pop-punk tendencies that you would find from them. One thing I forgot to mention with this record too is lyrically, it's very incel-y in a way. Like, I know Fall Out Boy have, especially early on, done those songs where they were like talking about having a crush on a girl who just doesn't seem to, like them, or being in a past relationship trying to move on from that girlfriend and whatever, to coming to terms in the end. But like, these lyrics, man, they're very just interesting, and you can see how much they've grown when it comes to lyrics over the years. It went from just being like, I hate this girl now, to more important things, I guess. But, most of these guys were in their late teens to early 20s by the time they were recording this, so you can't fully blame them. However, this album does definitely sound a little rough because, well, at this point, it just sounds like the record label threw together the demos without actually finishing the songs, and I guess that's why Fall Out Boy was just kind of like, we need more time to work on this, and the record label, for whatever reason, wouldn't let them do it. Another thing different about this record is you may see something different on the cover of the album, as mainly when we think about Fall Out Boy, we think about Patrick Stump, Pete Wentz, Joe Trohman, and Andy Hurley. Stump, Wentz, and Trohman are on this record. I mean, they were like the first 3 members of Fall Out Boy, with Wentz and Trohman being the main founders. But you see these 2 guys here who nobody really knows a whole lot about. Those being, at the time, drummer Mike Parsukowitz, and a rhythm guitarist, TJ Kanash, I think is how you would say his name. Now, I don't know which one is which on the album cover. It's very hard to find any pictures of them on like Google and stuff like that. Like, it just almost seems like they don't exist. This would be the only album where we would see Fall Out Boy as a 5-piece. Although that seems a little deceiving in itself, as well as the little that the band did talk about this album. Patrick Stump mentioned that at the time Parsukowitz had pretty much been out of the band, and that Kanash was not present much when it came to the making of this record in general. So I did get it wrong. It was Parsukowitz that drummed on the project, whereas TJ was actually out of the band at that point, so Fall Out Boy still wasn't technically a 5-piece. However, those 2 still get credit for being in the band. And it was also stated that Parsukowitz wasn't in the band much longer after this point either, so they probably already intended to get rid of him for Andy Hurley. Basically, at this point, it seemed to just be a 3-piece from Fall Out Boy. As during this time, Hurley still wasn't in the band, so I would assume that with Patrick Stump taking up guitar and also being known as a drummer in his early days, did a lot of the drumming on Evening Out With Your Girlfriend. There's only been one known song from this EP, LP, whatever you want to call it, that actually ended up getting re-recorded and put on Fall Out Boy's actual debut record as a song Calm Before the Storm, which is the second track off of Evening Out, and the 10th track off of Take This to Your Grave would get redone. The screaming vocals by Pete Wentz would be added in, and to be honest with you, that version sounds a whole lot better than the version we get here. It just finally feels complete. Another song that would kind of get released for or from this project is the song Growing Up, which was the other song from this project that I knew, and it was released on the first Believers Never Die Greatest Hits record that Fall Out Boy released in 2009. However, instead of saying it was a song off of Evening Out With Your Girlfriend, they just classified it as a rarity track, and to this day, it's really the only time that Fall Out Boy has even gone back to this record in general, as they don't really seem to talk about it. None of the other songs, other than Calm Before the Storm, have been played live, at least since the early days when they actually did play these songs, when they were still playing like small venues and didn't have a lot to play. But I think the question here was, why was this thing released in the first place? Now you gotta think to yourself, Fall Out Boy was signed with Uprising Records at this point, but they quickly left. They signed with Fueled By Ramen, and that's where their actual debut record came out. And when Uprising did release this record without the band's permission, why didn't the band do anything about it? Well, I mean, you gotta think at the time, them being a smaller, unknown band, if they were to, I guess, sue this big record company, they knew that they would probably not benefit from it. They wouldn't come out on top, and even if they did, they still would be a lot in debt from, you know, the court case and all this kind of stuff. Plus, they knew at that point in time that they were probably releasing an actual well-put-together album in a couple of months, so that record in particular, Evening Out With Your Girlfriend, is their technical only studio album that hasn't charted anywhere, mainly because there was limited copies sold, and just a couple months later in May is when Take This to Your Grave would be released. Evening Out was then remastered in 2005, where they shortened up some songs. When you listen to the original portion of the record, a lot of the songs end and then it's 10 seconds of silence before they even get into the next song, so they kind of chop that up and just make it to where it goes from one song to another without any silence. And as of November of 2021, the album itself by the band was put on streaming services. You can now find it and you can download it for yourself if you want to. So all in all, I think the reason I decided to make this video was because it's always interesting to find out about these so-called projects that were originally intended to be something before they became something else in this case. It's like how you realize in 2003, if Green Day's Cigarettes and Valentine's Day tapes never got stolen, they were going to release that instead of American Idiot, which they released a year later. And with Fall Out Boy, this is probably a record that should have never saw the light of day, but in the end, I guess they had what you would call, not necessarily a greedy record label, but they deemed it as finished enough that they wanted to put it out there, I guess, to kind of, maybe they thought, oh, well, they're about to release their actual debut record, maybe if we get their name out there and help them out a little bit, when really, you can just call that false Fall Out Boy, because again, the other two band members that were in the band at that time weren't in it and had little to nothing to do with that project in the first place, as at this point, Andy Hurley was in the band recording the debut album with them, and that's kind of the lineup that we have been stuck with for 20 years now. So just know, even though their recent album that came out, Too Much for Stardust, is seen as their 8th studio album, it could technically be their 9th. You can pull what Blink-182 did, where when they released 9 in 2019, they said, oh, it's our 9th studio album, because they counted their early demos album Buddha as their first studio album, when really we all know it was Cheshire Cat that was their debut. But with Fall Out Boy, this just seems to be a thing of record label mix-up, and band mix-up, whereas the band didn't want this to see the light of day because they knew they could do better with more time. The record label was like, well, you recorded it, it's out there, it might not be fully finished, but my God, it's finished enough and we are going to put it out there. Maybe it was in the contract, I don't know. Sometimes when you have a contract with a record label, you got to get a certain amount of albums out there, or at least before you terminate the contract, you would need to put something out there. So maybe that was the case in this little story here, but I guess we'll truly never know because Fall Out Boy doesn't talk about it, and it doesn't seem like they want to talk about it that much because, well, they've been better off since, and they signed with Fueled by Ramen, released their debut record, and only a couple of years later would they start to take the world by storm with songs like Sugar We're Going Down and Dance Dance, and then continue on their legacy from there into 2023. But that's just my thoughts on this. You can tell me in the comments below, what do you think? Do you count Evening Out With Your Girlfriend as Fall Out Boy's actual debut record, or do you see it more as an EP demo type thing where, you know, you understand it's not completely finished and why Fall Out Boy wouldn't call it that, but at the same point in time, if you go to Wikipedia, it calls this a mini LP, so in some way, I guess it is kind of an album, the unofficial debut record, as we can put it. That's it for me. Stay safe out there, and until then, I will catch you all in the next one.
And they made records like Evening Out With Your Ex-Girlfriend. Evening Out With Your Ex-Girlfriend. Everybody loves it.
It's called Evening Out With Your Girlfriend.
With your ex-girlfriend. It's called Evening Out With Your Ex-Girlfriend. It's called Evening Out Your Girlfriend.